The importance of light in today's tutorial of painting Magnolia bud. Line drawing is done, which is available for download with an elastic eraser, removing the excess amount of graphite off the paper. I'm painting in my sketchbook 200 GSM paper. Let's mix watercolors. I will take red violet. Second mix red violet with a little touch of Magnolia red. Perylene violet. Red violet for darker shadow area. Manganese violet separately for the lighter parts of this Magnolia bud flower. Be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors. Painting with round synthetic brush, applying water layer on the first part of this Magnolia bud where the petal is on the left side, starting with red violet and perylene violet mix. And from the darker part of this petal, adding red violet. Slowly, as you can see, I will talk in this tutorial mostly about light and how important it is in realistic watercolor painting. I picked this subject intentionally because we can clearly see there's a lot of light in this Magnolia. So I'm starting from the shadow area, moving slowly towards the lightest part, and I'm not completely covering this side of the petal with watercolors. Now I washed my brush and now moving watercolors that I already have in that first shadow area. Again, washing my brush, cleaning in paper towel, smoothing, spreading watercolors towards the lightest part. It is always with light area better to have it much wider rather than completely cover it. Now manganese violet on the right side of this petal. It is slightly in shadow, but not as dark as the lower part of this petal. With round synthetic brush, pushing my watercolors from the shadow area. I'm not loading my brush with any new amount of watercolors, using the same amount that I applied in the beginning in the shadow area. Moving to the next petal, and as you can see, first one is left really light at this stage, and that is much better than have it much darker. With transparent amount of watercolors, loading my brush and carefully applying watercolors to the right side of this Magnolia. This petal is much smaller in size, so if you are not managing with bigger brush, you can take smaller brush here. There's very narrow area for this petal, and again my watercolors are transparent, and this petal is slightly darker on the upper part and then it becomes lighter. So I applied watercolors and leaving the upper part of this Magnolia completely unpainted. It's white as is paper. Moving to the middle petal, which is the darkest one and is covered with both petals from both sides. Applying water, using here finer tip brush. Watercolors are red violet and perylene violet with red violet. Applying watercolors and carefully moving them. I'm applying watercolors on the upper part of this petal and on the lower part, leaving middle part unpainted. Because again, we can clearly see from the reference that it is in light. Light is shining on the middle part of this petal. Again, in the beginning, leaving much wider area of light than it appears in the reference. If we will leave the same amount as we see in the reference, that we will have a crisp finishing part where the watercolors end and the light starts. To avoid that crispness, we need to leave wider area unpainted and then smooth out, and with next layer again smooth out until we reach the right size. Now as the first petal is dry, paper had his time to rest. Now I'm applying next layers of watercolors, again starting from the shadow area. Now I'm using finer tip brush, using watercolor mix of Perlin Violet and Red Violet. Here we see from the reference that the lower side of this petal is much darker, more intense, but again we are achieving that with layers. And as I am applying watercolors in the shadow, I'm not covering the whole surface, just that area that is in the shadow, not pushing watercolors over the whole surface of the flower. Also with this middle petal, again I'm applying watercolors in the shadow area, smoothing and carefully pushing watercolors with clean brush towards the lighter part. Here we have a cast shadow area, very small cast shadow area, smoothing with a clean and dry brush. Now from the upper part, applying watercolors, cleaning my brush and smoothing with clean brush, leaving middle part light. Cast shadow area, constantly checking reference for little details. This magnolia flower is closed, there's not so many petals visible, so we need to search for those little details that we even can find in this simple reference. If we have very small amount of subjects, then we need to really look for details. If we have a composition where lots of flowers, maybe flower with so many petals, then we are not digging into finding teeny tiny details, but we are working on those many subjects. For example, with this, when we have so less visible of petals, subjects, then we are digging into finding those details that we can find in this particular flower. Painting transparently, applying watercolors, leaving light area light, not over painting it. When I'm adding watercolors, I'm adding in one particular area. Constantly looking for guidance in a reference. Open reference right beside you, right beside the tutorial, on the screen, on other gadget. As long as you can zoom in closer and study the details of the reference. Applying another layer on the right side. Everything is done transparently with small amount of watercolors. Fine brush strokes. And also on these petals are visible petal veins and the directions. As I'm applying those fine brush strokes, I'm looking for, in the reference, for guidances in which direction those veins are, how better to apply them so it looks realistic. Loading my brush Perylene Violet and Red Violet. Again, shadow area, leaving middle part unpainted. Moving slowly and transparently, building saturation, tonal values, and realistic look of the simple magnolia bud. Smoothing the applied with clean brush, no watercolors now. Deepening shadows, and as I'm working in shadow area, I'm not going over light area. Now we can leave flower to rest and paint green parts. Taking sap green, I have a palette already with some green mixes and I'm not washing it. Adding transparent yellow, perylene green. If you have watercolor palettes and there are still some watercolor mixes, don't wash those palettes. You can still use them. I have clean palettes for your understanding of watercolors, but if you are not showing anyone what are you painting, you can leave your color palettes dirty with watercolors and use them again. Starting with the water layer, painting with finer tip brush, applying transparent amount of sap green and transparent yellow mix. I will not be going into so many details with these leaves. This tutorial is more about light and this Magnolia bud, but we will paint some detail for these leaves to make the whole composition look realistic. Alizarin crimson on the side, mixing together with sap green and transparent yellow, and I have a browner mix. If you add a little bit more of red to your green mix, that instantly will become brown, and this little tiny detail that we see is browner rather than green. Then there's the middle part, which is darker from where the leaves are coming out. Again, looking for details. Even when I'm painting looser, I'm still looking and teaching my eye to look for details. That is one of the most important observation skills that you need for realistic art, to look for details. No matter how are you painting, looser or more detailed, train your eye to look for different color tones, little details. The more you look, the more train is going to be used to that, and it will start to see those details, different color tones. It's all about practice. The more you do it, the better you will become with it. Adding shadow to this curved leaf. On the lower part, there's darker area and the tip is light. Again, we are not painting the whole leaf in one color that we see or that we pre-mixed. We are painting just little area that is darker. If we have some watercolor mixes, we don't need to apply to the whole surface. Apply in different areas, smooth the applied layer instantly, and build gradually with transparent watercolors. You can see how small amount of watercolor mixes I have on my palette. Painting gradually and transparently is the key to achieve realistic, full result. It's not about the darker you will go with your mixes, the better. It's about layers. It's about leaving light really light. Applying small details to leaves with the tip of the brush. Shadow areas that we see in the reference. Slowly building contrast with darker brush strokes. And again, leaving light on these leaves to make them breathe of air and make them light. The more watercolors of saturated mixes we add, the flatter and heavier painting is going to look at the end. With watercolor painting, it's better to leave light much more and wider rather than overpaint it. Adding little brush strokes to this browner area because it is hairy and little brush strokes are replicating little hairs on the surface. I noticed that the light area in the middle petal is too light, so with transparent amount of watercolors I'm overpainting it, but again, look, the light stays light, it just slightly becomes calmer, not so bright and intense. Transparently and accurately, paint light, practice more. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed this mini tutorial of light. Give it a try and let me know how you did it. Thank you and see you in my next tutorials.